Welcome to This Club Sucks. Grief support for parents after the lasagnas are long gone. I am your host, Melissa Monroe, here with my co-host, Alexandria Seamock. Each week we record our child loss chat on Twitter Spaces, where we explore topics around grief and trauma. Whether you are a bereaved parent, want to support bereaved parents, or exploring other sources of grief, we'll be here holding space after the lasagnas are long gone.
Oh, this club sucks.
Welcome to Child Loss Chat. I'm Melissa Monroe, here with my co-host, Dr. Alexandria, Dr. A for short. She does all of the background stuff that seems seamless, but is not. She's my Vinny and keeps control of the room, keeps any trolls out. We've never really had a problem with that, but mainly because they're afraid of Dr. A. But today's guest, I'm extremely happy to have on. I'm not happy that we have a cause to be on the show, but I'm grateful to Kelly Farley for coming on the show. He is the author of Grieving Dads. And as we've discussed many times on the show, fewer men tend to reach out for support during grief, partly because of how we've all been socialized. And therefore, there are less men/dad related grief resources. And so it's a real honor to have Kelly on here. And I know Warren and probably Adam will have some stuff to add. But today I really want to just interview Kelly for a few minutes and then let the guys take the platform. Kelly, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone on Child Loss Chat?
As Melissa said, I'm also a grieving dad or a grieving parent. I've lost my daughter, Katie, in 2004. Then 18 months later, I lost my son, Noah, in 2006. And I won't get too deep into my journey because I assume we'll talk about that a little bit here today. But I didn't respond to it very well, meaning I didn't seek help, didn't talk about it, buried all my emotions, my feelings, didn't allow myself to be to feel it. Really, to feel the grief. I just ran from it and tried to help my wife through it because I thought that was my role. Long story short, I didn't end up very well. A couple years later, it finally caught up with me in extreme depression, despair, all the things I'd never experienced before in my life. And I got to a point where I was either, in my mind, going to die. I could see myself dying, or I was going to have to surrender. And eventually, I set my pride aside and all the stuff I've been taught since a young child of big boys don't cry, toughen up, knock it off, or I'll give you something to cry about. All those things I was conditioned as a young child, I had to set those aside and change the way I think. And it's not an easy task. It sounds easy, but it wasn't an easy task. It was really just surrendering. And but once you do it, and once I did it, it made a huge difference in starting the healing process. Once I decided to surrender, I decided to go to counseling and support groups and all the stuff I swore I'd not do, would never do. But I realized my first counseling session, and I fought it. I fought it with my family doctor. He's like, Kelly, I think you're dealing with grief and it's depression. And I'm like, nope, it's not what it is. There's something physically wrong with me. That can't be what this is. I've been able to weather most storms in my life, nothing like this. But I just didn't believe that I couldn't push through it. I felt like a failure that I wasn't able to control my emotions. Right or wrong, that's how I felt. And looking back, I know I was wrong. But at the time, my experiences and my ego and my pride just wouldn't allow me to surrender. But I noticed something when I started going to these support groups and counseling. And I was embarrassed to go. I remember sitting in the waiting room at this counseling center, and first time I'd gone to one. And I told my doctor, I'm not going. I'm not taking an antidepressant. I'm not doing any of that stuff. And it was on I'm in Chicagoland area. It was a cold Midwestern day. I think it was late November, early December. Dreary, cloudy, been that way for a couple of weeks. And I'm on my hands and knees in my living room, just begging for some sort of emotional relief, and it wasn't coming. And I remember going in to see my doctor, and he's like, and I mentioned earlier, Kelly, it's grief. Here's a prescription. Go see this counselor. I'm like, nope, not doing it. But that day when I was on my hands and knees, I'm like, you know what? I got to do something. And so I did. I called a counselor, set an appointment, went in, sat there in the lobby in the waiting room, and I'm like, man, I hope somebody does not see me in here that knows me, and how embarrassed I would be if they did see me, because it's me. Like I don't need help. Other people need help, not me. I don't need it. I got everything under control. But when I sat down in that chair, everything just released, and I sat there for an hour. I don't know what we talked about, but I just bawled the entire time. And I remember walking to my car in the parking lot. It was the first time in a long time I felt some sort of this emotional relief. It wasn't all gone. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't a one session and done. But I did notice that I started to not feel that like sense of maybe there was a glimmer of hope, maybe. But it was definitely not what I felt like before I walked in there. The weight had lifted ever so slightly. And so I did that for about a year and a half, and then realized as I started looking around, look, there's nothing out there for men, because I started looking for other stuff. Like, is there books? Is there other guys out there feeling the same way? And I couldn't find anything. So in 2009, that's when I decided, late 2009, after working with a personal life coach, I decided that I was going to be the guy that created a resource. And so that's how Grieving Dads came to be. I spent 2 years traveling around North America, interviewing men that experienced the death of a child from all walks of life, just having a cup of coffee, having a beer, whatever. We would just chat, share each other's journeys or story. And I recorded all those, and I collected the stories and kind of weaved them through my experiences. And that's how Grieving Dads to the Brink and Back came to be.
Mm-hmm. What a beautiful story, Kelly. And thank you for sharing that with us. Mm-hmm. I think that for so many of us, even the ladies that were born in a certain generation, therapy was just, therapy was something that you did, and it just reminded to turn off your mic when you're not speaking, because otherwise Twitter gets funky. Thank you. People of certain generations were just kind of raised to think that therapy was for if you had schizophrenia or you were really, there was something majorly, like a major psychological crisis. So there is a resistance, and I think it's definitely worse in men and young men and boys because of how we're socialized, and unfortunately still socialized. I think it's a little better than when we were little. I don't know how old you are. I'm 53. So, in the 70s and 80s when I was growing up, it was don't cry, don't be upset, chin up, brush it off, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And it doesn't really allow for an authentic expression of emotions. And anything that we don't express starts to cause problems psychologically and even physically. So it's interesting that you brought up that you felt as if something was physically wrong with you. And that...
Because I think there was.
Yeah, there is.
Because it held it in, right? There was damage, and I mentioned this in my book, and I mentioned it to the grieving dads I speak to. There was damage done. I mean, I don't think I'll ever understand the full extent of it, but there was no doubt damage done to me as a result of holding that in. No doubt. And by the way, I'm also 53, so I think we grew up during the same messaging.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also grew up near you. I grew up in Peoria, Illinois, and then I went to Loyola, Chicago, and Rogers Park, and then I did research at University of Chicago. So Chicago feels like home to me. That's my favorite city ever. But yeah, I'm an acupuncturist. I've been in the medical field one way or another for my entire life, pretty much. I've taught yoga. Was a dancer. I've taught Pilates. I had a Pilates studio. I'm an acupuncturist now. And I can tell you, I always joke that the patients come for the pain, but they stay for the psychology, because they don't realize that their chronic back pain or their chronic neck pain or their chronic shoulder pain or whatever it is, stomach pain, headaches, whatever it is, there is an emotional component to all of them. And we're just not taught to look at it that way. The mind and body are combined, that they are one, they work together. And so absolutely, grief, if unexpressed, is going to cause any feeling unexpressed is going to cause problems, and different emotions are going to cause different types of problems. But I'm glad that you addressed that, because it's really important, and hopefully a little warning for those who are convinced that holding it in is the best way. The more stories like this they hear, the it makes it safer for them to express, and B, it helps them realize the real cost that can come from not expressing that. The broken heart syndrome is real, that people can and do die of broken hearts. Oh, I'm really glad that you addressed that, Kelly.
When I say I was dying, I could see it. I could see it in my eyes in the mirror. You know, I remember I would punch, like I'd punch the countertop in my bathroom, like trying to give myself a pep talk. But then I'd break down crying. It's like it wasn't working. What worked for me before just was not working. And like you said, mental health is physical health, and physical health is mental health. I never understood that. Well, I've never heard it before until after I was living it. And then I started to open myself up to maybe what I was doing was wrong. And that's the message I try to get out now. And I got another book due out this spring called "He Lost His Baby Too," where I died at than I did on the first book, mainly because I've learned a lot in the 10 years since that book came out, 11 years since that book came out. I've learned even more from the dads I've met and interviewed over the years.
Congratulations on the new book, and I'm so glad that you're writing on this topic. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the journey of collecting the stories from the fathers, and what the impetus obviously was losing your own children, but what sparked that idea in particular? And can you walk us through a little bit about how you got that going, and how some of those early conversations went for you and your guests?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, I'd hired a life coach. I'd gone through all the counseling, but I also knew I couldn't go back to the guy I was before. And the guy I was before was I was a little more self-serving, self-focused. Get out of my way. If you're having a bad day, that's not my problem. It's your problem. Terrible stuff, but I didn't have empathy, I guess. And I was more focused on getting ahead in my business. I had a real estate business. I'm also an engineer. So I have more of an analytical type, very direct type personality. And I still do. That Grieving Dads to the Brink and Back book is not a what I call rainbows and butterflies grief book. It is a very direct, candid conversations I've had with these men. I think that's the only way I was able to get them to open up, was to have direct conversation. It wasn't like, "Oh, you'll be okay," whoever I was talking to. It was like, "Yeah, I get it. I've lived it. I'm still living it. I understand." I may have been 5-6 years out with some of these guys, and some of them may have only been a few months. But I interviewed men from all walks of life, and it was by design. And I made faith neutral. There's some faith components in there, but I wanted anybody who picked up this book to not feel didn't have a story that was similar. So there was a lot of thought that went into the type of stories, the type of losses. There's a lot of taboo type loss out there that people don't feel comfortable talking about, whether it's suicide or drug overdose, murder, and all the way down to miscarriage, stillbirth, all the above. You name it, I've heard it. And we could probably do several other sessions on some of the stories I've heard along the way that will make your skin crawl. Some of them I have to look up to see if they're even true. But I'm honored that these guys feel that they can pick up the phone and call me. And I still take calls from these guys even to this day, whether it's an email or a phone call, and I try to get back to them in a timely manner, to where, I've been that person on the other line trying to frantically call phone, just listen to me. So I understand that sense of urgency one feels when they're in that mode. But one of the things I noticed is there's a lot of common themes I noticed, and I say this a lot to the grieving dads I speak to and some of the organizations that I speak to, is the guys I find that are very stuck still in their grief, and there's ones versus the ones that have, I'm not going to say moved on, but they're evolved. They have a sense of hope, and they've now done things with their life to like make a difference. Is the fact they've found a way to live their life to honor their child, versus the ones that are still very stuck in their grief, not talking about it. The ones that start talking about it, and then also doing something, whether it's a nonprofit, writing a book like I did, or whatever it is that means something, that connection between you and your child, do it. Whatever that takes. It doesn't have to be started on day one. It may take a couple of years for that idea to come to you. But I noticed the guys that are doing something, whether it's donating hockey jerseys to a low-income hockey team with your son's jersey number on them, all the way to planting a tree every year. It doesn't matter what it is. It's something you have to have a connection with that child that's going to give you a purpose, a reason to keep living, and to have that connection with your child. So that's one of the common themes that I noticed. The ones that are doing very well. My wife and I have this saying, is like, you can get through it, but you never get beyond it. Some people just don't get through it. They just live in it. And it's important to embrace it. And I don't mean that like, oh, I'm happy this happened to me. I don't mean it that way. I mean like, hey, at some point in time, you got to realize there's nothing you can do to change it. It happened. Now, what are you going to do to take that and turn it into something that now can be used to help other people, help yourself, and honor your children?
Absolutely. And I have also noticed that in my time as a bereaved parent, the people who seem to be able to evolve, as you say, are in some way, have found a way to incorporate the memory of their child and take it with them in their present and project it into the future, which would be a great time. I would like to introduce you, Kelly, to my friend Warren, who's a fellow SUDC parent. Both of our children died of sudden unexplained death in childhood. And Warren is one of those that started doing things in his child Nolan's memory right away. So Warren, I wondered if you wanted to come up and say a few things on behalf of bereaved dads.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate this the topic and the conversation today. You were mentioning, I think you were referring to Nolan Fest. Is that what you were referring to?
Yes, but you guys do so much in his memory, but Nolan Fest in particular.
Yeah. So, well, Nolan passed in his sleep. Most, not all, but most SUDC kids often pass in their sleep. And in August of 2020. So Nolan was a super musical kid, loved to perform, loved theater, loved arranging, producing, mixing, writing songs, playing all kinds of instruments, and so he had written a whole bunch of songs and was really getting rolling with polishing up his songs to get ready to release them. And he died 2 weeks before his first song went live. And so, everybody who's going through child loss, people say, oh, your knees are taken out from you. I'm like, that's not even close. It's like you're in a new universe where the laws of physics don't even apply, and just being lost. And of course, the early stages of what has happened, or the long amount of time it takes to accept that it happened, even after we're functioning humans in the world, that really blows my mind. Like, I'm mostly functional now. Like I work, I go look for ways to help other people, and especially others grieving, especially other parents grieving the loss of a child. But I describe the acceptance as the hardest part. It takes for me. I'll just speak for me. It's kind of like a plane that takes forever to land, and I don't know when it's gonna when it's gonna be done landing, but acceptance. Just like for me, the hardest moments are when it sinks in that, oh, this really happened. The moment, the latest moment when it happens is like one more piece to the puzzle.
That's
So,
interesting, Warren.
yeah, go
When
ahead.
you say that, I'd say I hear that a lot. Is like, and I tell dads this when I chat with them. They call me they're a month out or 2 months out or 6 months out, and
Wow.
I try to be very honest with them about it. And I tell them this. I don't tell you this to scare you. I just tell you this to prepare. I mean, everybody's journey is different, but this doesn't take. It's not a 6 months to 12-month ordeal.
Yeah.
This is they're like, is this going to get better? And it's been 6 months or been a couple months. I'm not feeling any better. I'm like,
Wow.
this takes years, and I hate to say that because it's overwhelming to hear that, but it also prepares them. Don't panic. It's not like you're not broken forever, and I can tell you that from someone that's now 15 to 18 years out.
Yeah.
But there'll come a time where the thought of your child, it will bring you sadness or that feeling of being broken. To now, that child brings a smile to your face, and the thought of your child it warms your heart, you get a sense of peace. I can't tell you when that happens. I tell guys that I can't tell you when that happens, but it happens. It's not always the thought of your child's not always going to bring sadness to you.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I'm in a group of dads, and I just went to look at your website. I'm going to check it out. It's amazing what you're doing. I totally agree. Like I'm like most men. My wife directed me to the place to get help. My wife scheduled me a dentist appointment. My wife says I need to go to the doctor for. Women are really good at self-care. Women are good at coming together. Women are generally, I'm generalizing, way better than men at getting help, and way better at feeling feelings. And like as you were telling your story, like men do it differently. We need to go through the same stuff. We just do it differently. It looks different.
Yeah, there's
And
no doubt about that. It is different. It's
eh,
it's the same, but it's different.
yeah, I like one of the things I realized. Well, I didn't realize this. The founder of the group that I'm with, they he tells the story occasionally. I find it's really helpful to retell the story. But there he was going to other groups, and it's almost all women. And just like you were saying, and as you were initially telling your story, where are the groups? What about me? What about the dads? And not that dads are even thinking that. It's way worse. Um, so many dads aren't even thinking that until it gets bad enough. And the way I look at it is that feelings are for feeling them, and people who push them down or try to, oh, I don't want to get emotional, that doesn't work, because all those feelings are going to be waiting for you, or they'll come out of the cracks in moments that aren't very convenient if they're not processed or dealt with.
No doubt.
Um,
There's a saying in my book that it's you close the door on grief, but it will peek in through the window, and that kind of
that's
paints a
good.
picture of really how spooky it
I'm gonna
is. I
use
mean,
that.
it will peek in, and you will have to deal with it.
Or knock the window out completely.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
No
or
doubt.
knock the window.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
coming in one way or the other.
I realized when I started going back out in the world, or it was way after I'd started, because I started pretty early on in the process, going back to work. But I did it very timidly and kind of safely, and I work for myself, and I have my own clients, and um, and they're all very understanding and supportive. And I had this one client that I had been tolerating who was demanding, manipulative, controlling, narcissistic, all kinds of reasons. Like, oh, he shouldn't. I should have. I betrayed myself is how I ended up getting this client in the first place. I knew better. And so now in grief, the moments when this client was demanding or super manic or unreasonable or really manipulative, it would just it became the pressure of the moment coupled with how pathetically stupid and ridiculous this is compared to my context called my son died would just, it kind of like broke open these walls of anger. And I think like 3 times I've been in this client's home on the verge of screaming at him and firing him in his own house. Like, and
You're better
grateful.
than me.
Yeah.
I probably would have. Because
Yeah.
there was a lot of FU moments throughout my
Oh
journey
yeah.
early on, and still are. I mean,
But I'm speaking to what Melissa was saying about like how it may even break the window out, you
oh
know,
yeah, it
because
will. I
those are
mean,
moments where I could have broken the window. I was screaming at the client because he was doing something, wasn't listening, and plus being demanding and so forth. And I had no tolerance for BS. In fact, it was worse than no tolerance. I was just going to hand it to him, and
hmm
uh, and he actually accused me of being, oh, what was the word? I looked it up, and the word described in the dictionary. The definition basically describes someone who's grieving. He's like, "What's the matter with you? You're really." Uh, I wish I could remember the word. And I was so like right to the brink, and I didn't pull the trigger. I didn't let anger take over, and I've now gotten to the point where I treat him, this client. I haven't replaced this client because I'm not quite ready to go get new clients. I'm not quite ready to go out in the world and say, "Hey, stranger, rely on me. I'm dependable." And I'm
I get it.
still learning how to make
I
the
get it.
donuts
Yeah.
and take baby steps, and
Yep.
I'm actually doing a lot better.
But you're only
But
2.5 years into it, too, Warren.
yeah, it's
I mean,
somebody
it's
said to me, "This just happened," and
no
it was
doubt.
like 12 months in, and I was like, "Oh, that's really helpful." You know, it puts him. It they There was somebody like you who was way further down the road than me, and they helped me put it into perspective that without saying it, that this is a long marathon. This isn't, and you're in the beginning.
Very much so. And it takes, and again, like you said it earlier, everybody's journey is a little different, but um, I've never met anybody in the thousands of grieving dads I've spoken to that have gotten through it in 6 months, a year, or even 3 or 4 years. It
I can't
takes
imagine that.
it takes time to get your feet back underneath you and get your footing. And I say this a lot, and I said it earlier. The person you were before is gone. You can't go back to the guy or the person you were before. They don't exist anymore. You know too much, and that applies to all aspects of your life. Like even your client, you know not to tolerate his BS. Right?
Yeah,
It's more
so
evident now.
the way I explain it to myself is my son's death is this dominating filter that my entire experience goes through this filter. So if I go pick up a piece of trash on the ground, it could be anything. I go buy milk at the package store, you know. I go grab the milk, I'm like, oh God, Nolan sure drank a lot of milk. Oh right, Nolan died. Or I'm gonna go, I'll pick up this piece of trash. Somebody threw it, tried to throw it out in the trash can. I notice it, so I'm gonna put it in the trash can. Oh right, Nolan's trash is. We still haven't emptied his trash in his room. Nolan died, and so it's this. Everything goes through this filter. Things that we think have nothing to do with it. It is now. It's like saying your eyes are the filter for light on the way to your brain. This grief is a new filter for me to interpret everything.
That doesn't
Um,
change. That doesn't change. It just becomes more of a life compass for you, right? Like it helps
Yeah.
you put things into perspective as you evolve
Yeah.
through this. It's like, you know what? Why am I stressing about this? It's not that big a deal. And I talk a lot about that in the new book, is because I'm 15 years out or 18 years out. I now have there's a chapter in the first book called The Long View where I interviewed guys that were more like 20 years out. Well, I'm now one
Oh,
of those
wow.
guys. So I'm one of those guys now, and now have a different perspective about life and things that happen to me in life. And I say this a lot to the grieving dad. Like, there's not a whole lot anybody can do to me right now that's going to be worse than what I experienced with losing Katie and Noah. There isn't. There's not much anybody can do to me. Not that I'm looking for a challenge, and I always clarify that, but I can't think of anything more profound than the death of a child. So it resets your perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. It's totally, and of course I was going to say the most comfortable place for me is to be around other parents. It's not just comfortable, but it's definitely the safest place, being around other parents who've lost a child. And not only is it comfortable or safe, of course, I don't have to put on there's no effort.
Nope, zero.
People can just be themselves.
Yep.
And boy, did I discount how much effort is involved, before Nolan died, in just going to be with the mailman when he hands me the mail. Like the
Yep.
simplest thing. And
But if you knew that mailman had lost a child, your relationship with him is completely different. Whether you guys talk about it or not, it's just you have that compassion for the person sitting next to you. Like there's
that
no
just happened.
yeah,
That just
there's no
happened.
air about anybody. There's no ego. It's just you know
I
what?
just went to the vet last week. I thought I was going to go to work, go see some clients that day, and had to take the cat, one of our cats, actually Nolan's cat, to the vet. And because she had diarrhea, and my wife would get really anxious. And I remember, well, she's usually always right. Usually only always right. Her intuition's really good. And so I took the cat to the vet, and next thing I know, all kinds of clients are waiting in the parking lot, and the vet is there talking about. I explained to them this is Nolan's cat, reminding them that he had died, and this is his cat, and it's very special to us. And next thing I know, the doctor is telling us about how her husband died. And she's standing in the doorway, and then her vet tech, this 20-something young woman, is standing there, and everybody's got masks on, and so I can't really fully see their faces. And I'm noticing that the young woman, the vet tech, hasn't left. Like, this is the kind of conversation that people are like, I have to go tie my shoes in the other room, And but the doctor, the vet, she really needed to talk about her husband, and it was beautiful, organic conversation. And then the young woman, she walks me out to my car, and it's freezing outside, and their car's waiting, and I'm apologizing for taking too long, and the weird conversation we just had. I hope it wasn't too uncomfortable, or I don't know what I was saying. But I turn to her, and I see that she's tearing up, and she says, "My best friend died of suicide 6 months ago." And she's standing in the park like she really needed to be in that conversation. And now she was away from her boss in the parking lot talking to me. And, I was just, tell me your friend's name. Tell me about your friend, because that's helpful. And
That's the beautiful
Yep.
thing about
yeah,
there is beauty. I
there
would
is.
I would give all the beauty away to have my child back. Let me
Oh my
just
God, yeah.
just make that clear. But once you go through something like this, you become a safe space, whether you want to or not, for all of the other people who are going through stuff. And like you said, most people, if you're standing around talking about death with someone, that's going to make a lot of people walk away and go tie their shoes in
I
another
used to
room,
be
as you
that
said.
person who would walk away. That used to
Right.
be me.
We
Yeah.
all
Too
have,
disturbing
probably.
to
Yeah, we all
contemplate.
have. Yeah.
I've always been a bloody hearted person, so I
I'll
never
speak for
was,
myself.
but I it's more so now. And when people realize that you have experienced that, and you become a safe space, and it's helpful for both of you, because it's helpful to think that your experience that may cause some isolation in other relationships in your life is bonding you to this person who really needs to bond to someone right now. And that's what's so beautiful about what you're doing, Warren, and what you're doing, Kelly. And I see Mr. JB is in here, what Mr. JB is doing. And it's really, I think, one of the best things that we can do to honor our kiddos is to become a safe space for people to have the conversations that make a lot of other people run away. And I wanted to touch on a couple of other things, and then I'm going to hand the mic back to the fellas. Um, Kelly, you said something that really reminded me of a talk that Joe Biden gave, and you can love Joe Biden or hate Joe Biden. It's really all up to you. We don't do politics on this show because grief knows no party. But it was several years ago. Biden gave a talk to a group of military families who lost children, and it is perhaps the single best talk on grief I've ever heard. But one of the things he does in the talk is say, one thing. Oh, this is the thing that reminded me, Kelly. You will one day think of your child and smile before you cry. And in the early days, that really seems impossible. But I remember clear, I had seen that talk, and one day I was getting dressed, and I happened to glance at a photo of Alice that's on my that's been on my bureau forever, even before she died. One of those things that's there so often you don't always really see it. And she's smiling really big in the picture, and I looked at it and I smiled, and then I realized immediately that I smiled. And then I realized, oh my God, I think that's the first time I ever smiled first. And I remembered that talk. And the other thing that Biden does in that talk is basically gives you permission to have low expectations, which is something that you were talking about, Warren, and you also, Kelly. I know, and I talk about this in my upcoming book, one of the greatest gifts I was given were friends saying, me apologizing for crying and them saying, are you kidding me? I'm surprised you're not a heroin addict. I, and me realizing, wow, these people have a really, really low level expectation of me. And that was really freeing. I had never enjoyed such a low level of expectation in my life. And it really allowed me to soar because I wasn't walking around then feeling like I wasn't adding up. And it also made it easier for me to tune out people who were judging or thinking I wasn't doing well. It made it I had enough people who were with low expectations that it became a lot easier for me to tune out, the the people who did not know of what they spoke. And Biden talks about, you know, in the beginning, chart down your hard days, with 10 being the worst and one being the best, or maybe it was the opposite. For our purposes today, let's say 10 is the worst. He said, over time, you will see there will always be days that are 10. Always. There's always going to be those days. But as time goes by, those days will become farther and farther apart, but they will always be there. And
That's interesting.
I just thought it was the most honest
Yep.
and
It works.
hopeful advice I'd ever heard, because it does a lot of things in a few words. It gives you permission to have shitty days for the rest of your life without feeling like you're abnormal. And it gives you hope that it won't always be day after day, minute after minute, that not every minute is going to be a 10. Because I do think with men and women both, it can be tricky to feel like as you start to do a little better, as you start to like find some enjoyment in life, most people I know experience some guilt with that and become really torn. Am I abandoning my child because their death is all you have left of them? The grief of their loss is all you have left of them. And so I saw in myself and I see it in others, a tendency to kind of try to cling on to that grief and really kind of hold on to it because it can feel like you're abandoning your child or the memory of your child. So I just really love that Biden story because it gave you permission to feel like shit for the rest of your life if you need to, but hope that it won't be all day, every day, forever. And I just thought it was really, really amazing. I put the link in the chat.
That's interesting because I actually used that technique, and it was a counselor that recommended it to me. It was a male counselor, and I actually talk about it in my new book, and I actually talk about that technique in my new book just because it helped me so much to be able to, like, there's days I'd tell the counselor, I don't think I'm going to get better. Am I going to get better? Am I going to survive this? And the first counselor I went to was a woman. She's like, yes, Kelly, you're going to survive this. Are you sure? Are you sure I'm going to survive this? Because I don't think I'm going to survive it. And so I needed that reassurance all the time. You're going to survive it. You're going to. I ended up going to this other counselor, and the first time I went to him, I took a little bit of offense to it. But after I was done telling my story, he's like, if I didn't see with my own two eyes, I would swear I was sitting here listening to a woman express her pain and not a man. And keep in mind, this is after I'd gotten comfortable with telling my story. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? What do you mean? You'd think I was a woman sitting there telling the story. So we kind of laughed a little bit about it. And then I said, well, I'm still struggling. There's days I don't think I'm getting better. And he's like, here, try this technique in the exact 1 through 10. I did it every AM. I did it every PM. And I ranked them. And I did it for almost a year. I probably did it for like 10 months. And you can see trends. You can see that early on where you're scoring. For me, it was 1 being my worst day, 10 being the best. So it was reversed. But, I'd have a 1 for like a week. And then all of a sudden I'd be like, well, there's a 5. I'd look back and go, look, I had a 5. I had a 5, then I had a 4. That's a hell of a lot better than 1. So there is progress, but it's so slow. It doesn't feel like you're making any improvements at all. But if you put the hard work in, you will see the improvements. It just takes so much time.
But
so much
also
effort.
Helps to have, like, people say to have your tribe. Like, it helps to have people to say, hey, Kelly, do you remember back, 6 months ago, blah, 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 whatever story? Remember when you were there? Like, it helps to have your people that we trust
Extremely
to help
important.
us to see how far we've made progress. Because if you've made progress, but you don't appreciate it, it doesn't exist for you.
That's right.
And I feel like, I hear this all the time. People say, oh, there's no rules in grief. And I understand the intent of that is to say, like, everybody does it differently and so forth. But I have noticed some things that all humans need. Like, all grief, for healing to happen, witness needs to be involved. And I feel like a good rule of thumb is you need to find your tribe. And then I also feel like everyone needs to talk about it. Even the stoic dudes or quiet or whatever, it doesn't matter. They all need to talk about what they're going through.
No doubt about it. And I can't emphasize that enough.
Maybe they're not rules. I don't know. I just noticed they always are true for everybody, Well,
there's a lot of common themes I've learned. Not every, I think you mentioned earlier, maybe it was Melissa, but everybody's journey is a little different. But there are common themes I've seen interviewing the thousands of grieving dads I've spoken to over the years. There's definitely some common themes, and one of them is having that tribe, even though there's some of them that swear they don't want to have one. The reason they don't want to have one because they're envisioning that tribe of their fellow friends they had before the loss,
right?
And how they were seen in that group, right? Because those
Part of
guys,
the old way of
yeah,
seeing things. Yeah.
yeah, like, I used to be the life of the party. One guy would tell me, he goes, "Now I'm not the life of the party, but they still expect me to be that guy when they invite me to the cookouts and all that stuff." And I felt the same way.
Yeah.
You're not that guy anymore. So, and I tell a lot of these guys, find your new tribe, find the tribe of grieving dads, and you don't even have to talk about the loss of your child. It's just hanging out with other guys that maybe you're grabbing dinner with once a month, and I've done that quite a bit. And um, I've got a guy. I'll tell you a quick story. It happened about a year and a half ago. I had to put our dog down that we had for 14 years. Well, we got that dog about 10 months after losing my son Noah, and we got him because it was our only children. We had no children, and neither one of us were pet people, right? But something kept telling us to get a dog. So we'd go look at dogs. Eventually, we got this little dog, and he was honoring his whole life. But we loved him. I mean, he was our therapist. He was our friend, right? But we had to put him down last year, and I had a setback of a lot of like reminders and like just kind of took me back to that grief for a couple of days. I didn't think I felt like I was like the severe grief that was setting back in, like, oh no, I'm going back into this hole. I don't want to go there. So I called a buddy of mine that I interviewed for the book. We've become good friends. I'm like, Joe, he's a mailman. And I knew he'd be in his truck, and I called him. He's in Buffalo, New York. I called him. He goes, "Hey, Kelly, what are you doing?" I said, "Oh, man, I'm having a bad day." And I start crying. He goes, "What's going on, man?" I'm like, I had to put my dog down. He's like, "Oh, no, dude, I know, man. I had to do that about 4 years after losing his son." And he lost his son in an ATV accident. And he goes, his story is like, this dog knew never to go upstairs, never, ever would go upstairs. They got back from vacation, is where his son had died on vacation. They get home, that dog's nowhere to be found. They went upstairs, that dog was laying outside his son's bedroom. The dog had known somehow that his friend had passed away, and it was laying outside his door. And so
That's unbelievable.
yeah, and he goes, that dog was my connection, and still my connection to my son. And so I get it. So to circle back, Warren, yeah, having that tribe of guys that you can call when you're having a bad day or whatever, it's important to have that. And get it. And I'm not talking. You may have some guys that'll help you through it that haven't experienced it, but I found that they're few and far between because they don't get it. And that's not a knock on them. How can they understand it? You can't understand it unless you've lived this. Period.
And you can't explain it. Like,
no,
I've also learned
there's no words.
That for myself, we've borrowed the phrase muggles for like normal people, people who have not had a child pass, who don't get it, who can't get it. It's kind of like from the movie Harry Potter, the muggles. And but when I have moments when I found myself explaining grief to someone is extremely vulnerable to stick your neck out, and sometimes is foolish, because then when they respond and they don't get it, now for me, I was all out there and explaining to them, and not only did they not get it, but they were like passing judgment or something like that, and that act kind of turned it into a weapon onto myself, and I was like, "Ooh, that was foolish. I shouldn't have done that." But when I'm around other dads, it's just a safe place. Like there's in the group I'm in is called Helping Fathers Heal, and there's a guy in our group I think he's 15 years down, and he rarely speaks. I think he's on the board of the parent organization, and I kind of called him Yoda, early on, and because whenever he would speak, I would borrow hope from him. And then I started noticing and then he and I became friends, and because I realized I could reach out to him, and then he'd reach out to me, and back and forth, and holy cow, there's even more there. And then a whole nother level is just when he's in the room, I feel like everything's going to be okay, because I'm borrowing his hope or his confidence or his love or whatever it is. Yeah,
all the above. It's all the above.
The tribe is just, it's amazing. I spent a lot of time with people who who I call them my unicorn people. Like that's a huge compliment. Weird and rare and special, and they might be a grieving dad. They might be just a weird friend who somehow just knows how to sit next to me. You know, they
Yep.
don't try to fix anything. They
Nope.
just hang out and do nothing. They don't even cook anything. They don't clean up. They're just in the room. They just help us be in the room. And my wife has a friend like that who's just amazing. Then
That's
we
a
have other
gift. It's a
friends
rare
who come
gift.
by. Somebody told me they had somebody who came over to their house. It was an old timer, old guy who came to their house, and he wouldn't talk about their child, but he would show up like almost every day to fix something, and that was his way of just showing them, you know, I'm not, you're not forgotten, and I'm here, and I'm going to be around you, even though you might be a mess, and it's up to us to also to make it up good. We make everything up. Sometimes someone will say something, the uh, the things people say, and often conversations in grief groups will be about like, oh, I can't believe someone said that, meaning it hurt, or stupid things people say. Well, sometimes I realize that, oh my God, I'm going to be walking into all these moments where people say shit, and I don't want to be just beaten up by it. So I decided, well, I'm just going to focus on, is their intention to be loving and supportive? And if I can check that box, I'm like, that's close enough, because there's no way they can know what to say. And everybody needs to say something. Everybody needs to do something. Well, there's nothing you can say that's going to like change it, or do that's going to change it. So go ahead and say something to show me you care, or you love Nolan, or you concerned about us, or do something. Make people send us like stupid plastic figurines of stuff, early on, and we were like, do they even know us? But it was a thoughtful thing to do. The intention was to be loving and supportive
I had to
until we
have
make it
a
up.
similar reckoning early on, Warren, where sometimes most of what came my way was beautiful support, but there were a few things that people said that were really not helpful, and maybe even damaging. And so but I knew they didn't mean any harm. I knew they meant well. I knew they loved Alice and they loved me and they were doing their best. And it's, we live in a grief illiterate society. And so I developed the smile, hug them, walk away. Like, they don't mean any harm. They mean well. They're doing the best they can. I'm doing the best I can. I'm going to accept the love and hug them and thank them, and then I'm going to walk away, because what they're giving is not helpful to me right now. This is like, hours afterwards, and I am just trying to get through this minute. And so I know I can't listen to this long term, but I'm going to receive what they gave me with love, knowing they meant it with love, knowing they didn't mean any harm. But then I've got to remove myself from this, because it is harming me, and they would feel horrible if they knew that. So smile, hug them, walk away is what is what I did, and I still do it to this day. And I wish I would have thought of it years ago. It's boundaries. Sometimes terrible things have to happen before we learn boundaries. We are coming up on the hour, and I don't want to keep Kelly too long. It's been so generous of you to spend this time with us, Kelly. But I wonder if you have any final thoughts that you would like to share with us about what you have learned through your personal journey and with talking to so many dads.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest thing, and I touched on it earlier, and it's something I've embraced even more so over the years, is that find that purpose. If it's Nolan Fest, is it Nolan? Was it Nolan Fest? Is that what it's called? Whether it's doing something like that or writing a book, but don't be afraid to get out there and find something that really gives you energy to go on and live your life again. You don't have to stay stuck in this grief. there is a life that's still worth living out there, and your child would want you to live it. And if you can do that by helping other people and honoring them, what a beautiful gift you have to give to them and to the world. And just being a light to someone else is healing for you as well.
Well, you're doing a remarkable job of it, Kelly. I am very grateful to you for sharing this time with us. And everyone go buy his book, Grieving Dads. And do you have any other talks or events coming up that people should know about, Kelly?
As of right now, I do not. I took a little time off, and I've kind of pivoted from doing seminars or webinars to speaking to grieving dads. So now I'm actually going into hospitals and training perinatal nurses and doctors on how to engage the grieving dad in the room and not just the mom.
Oh my God, good for you.
Yeah, I'm doing a little more of that, and then working on that second book that's, like I said, due out this spring. So nothing that's planned for and I'll be honest with you, why I don't do much of that anymore is because it's hard to get the grieving dads to show up. They want it. They say they want it. They say they want the tribes. They say they want these groups. But to get them to show up is another thing. I mean, some guys will do it, but for me to travel to, say, Denver or wherever to do a webinar, then one guy or two guys shows up, it's tough. But if I can capture them, if they're significant others or their girlfriends, wives, or whatever, make them go, like Warren said, then I've got their attention. I see healing in the room. There is no doubt.
Oh, yeah.
It goes with their head hanging low when they walk in, to big bear hugs I receive when they walk out. So I love doing them. It's just trying to get the word out and get the guys to show up. That's the biggest thing.
My experience is the same. Like the Helping Parents Heal organization has like 24,000 members in it. Then there's like 400, but only 440 members in the dads group. Think about that.
And how many of them actually participate in that group?
There's like 33 dads every week.
Yeah, so not even
1%.
Not even 10%, right?
That's like, it's to your point.
Yep, I know it. But I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and kind of share my message and my experiences and my just what I've learned on my journey and from all the other men that I've interacted with over the years. It's been a true gift to me to be able to go out, make a difference, and be a voice for grieving dads.
I'm really proud of you, and I'm grateful that you shared this time with us and your experience. And his book is beautiful. The link is in the chat. There's some other links on Grief and Dads in the chat as well. I also added the Helping Fathers Heal group and some other things we talked about. Thank you so much, everyone. Mostly thank you to you, Kelly, Farley, Warren. Thank you. Thank you for everyone who was here today and spent this time with us. And I want to just second what Kelly said. You will find purpose, and that is the key. And if you aren't in a place yet where you see that purpose, just keep taking one tiny step towards what feels like love, and then one tiny step. If it makes you feel just a little bit good, take one tiny step toward it. Take one tiny step, and eventually you will get there. Thank you so much to everyone. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Dr. A. Thank you, Warren. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you for joining us today. For more information on the show or my other work, you can check out thisclubsucks.com or melissamariemonroe.com, or you can find me on Twitter at @MMeaning. May you experience some gentleness on your path today.